I'm really glad that he revealed it, right? Because it does show the humanity behind what these superhumans do.
Personally, I thought that was nuts. Perhaps just looking back on it a little bit, Red Bull thought, well, who the heck do we actually put in that seat instead of Checo? So
Whoever they replace right now is not going to sell Red Bulls the same way that Checo sells it in America.
if the Ferrari fluctuates in performance the way it has this season,
Not
I
even Lewis.
cannot see a scenario where Charles Leclerc beats Lewis Hamilton. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tired F1 Pod. Here, just after the weekend where nothing has happened really. Ammar, how are you?
I'm good. I'm tired.
What? Tired? Tired from what? We've had no F1.
We've had no F1, and that's life been happening.
Ah, everything all right?
Everything okay, man? Not, nothing to be worried about. Just tired. I am a little bit worried about where Carlos is going to end up because it seems like a never-ending story. But that's another topic for another day. Hopefully,
Well, there you go. That
discuss it actually.
that definitely seems like something that's going to keep you tired. Right. We are going to talk about three drivers. The first one is going to be Max. Then we're going to talk a little bit about Checo. And finally, we're going to finish off with a little soliloquy about Charles Leclerc. But let's see how we go. Max. So I'm sure everyone has already heard this or seen this week, but he came out this week with a quote talking about his recovery from the Silverstone accident in 2021. So he said this: since my Silverstone crash, I've struggled with visibility problems, especially on undulating circuits or those with lots of advertising boards on the side of the track. In this race, and he was talking about the US Grand Prix in 2021, I wasn't just fighting against Lewis, but also against blurred images. It was like driving a speedboat at 300 kilometers per hour. And I've never said this before, but it was so bad for a few laps that I considered seriously turning the car off. Wow. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's quite the revelation, right? And there's no reason not to believe Max. I know we live in a very skeptical, maybe even a cynical world these days, but my first thought was that, he didn't reveal this in the heat of the battle. So I guess if there were cynics in the room, they would kind of put that down as an excuse. But I'm really glad that he revealed it, right? Because it does show the humanity behind what these superhumans do, right? Now we take it for granted.
Yeah,
So
wow.
one of my pet peeves is always criticizing drivers who are driving at 300 kilometers an hour or whatever the speeds are, making split decisions, and even the slightest of chinks in sort of your physical stature, right, is going to have massive consequences. And then people like us get on, and I'm not saying we do that, but we get on here and criticize them so easily, like it's piece of cake. So I found that really refreshing, by the way. I mean, one of the things I love to hear from athletes is how they're overcoming obstacles that we cannot necessarily see, right? And this is definitely one of those. So I loved every bit of it. Of course, I wouldn't wish that upon him by any means, but yeah, that was refreshing to hear. What do you think?
Yeah, that's really well put, Amara. I think yeah, this does speak to the resilience of Formula One drivers. I think back to the Qatar Grand Prix last year, and you hear Lance Stroll talking about blacking out on the straights, and
Oh,
yet he still brought the car home, right? This is peak performance, right? And people criticize Formula One drivers all the time. Like you said, we're on here week in, week out saying this driver didn't do this and this driver didn't do that. But the fact that Max, with a post-traumatic headache, was essentially still beating Lewis at the US Grand Prix in 2021, man, I mean, like if I didn't think already that Max was up here, I mean this would absolutely push it over the edge. And it does for me. It does alter a little bit the complexion of that last third of the 2021 championship season, right? Like I'm not taking anything away from Lewis at all, but Max was clearly hobbled a little bit. This isn't something that is minor. He was talking about like the images getting blurred in a sport where you're having to spot your braking points and throttle points, like to not be able to see those things because everything is a bit blurry. That must be so scary. But also, I mean, the level of commitment and skill to be able to get past that. I mean, yeah, I just can't. I can't. Like Max is that is an incredible thing to admit to, and to then try and imagine how he pulled out the performances he did in that season with that disadvantage is pretty like gobsmacking, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, it also to your point puts a lot of the wheel to wheel combat in perspective as well, right? Because that crash happened during that kind of, whatever side you're on, right? Whose ever fault it was,
Thank you for that.
outcome.
Like we're not getting into
Yeah,
that
we're not getting into that,
particularly.
but the outcome of that is it didn't matter if it was Max's fault, Lewis's fault. He went through this. Max went through this, and he's had to deal with it ever since then. And I'm sure other drivers have similar stories of severe crashes that have happened, whether regardless again of who's at fault. I think for me, it did put into perspective also the fact that. And look, I'm a neutral fan. I'm neither a Max guy, neither a Lewis guy, right? But at the end of 2021, I know, folks in the Lewis Hamilton camp felt undone, but a lot of people in the Max camp felt like this was a bit of karma, whether right or wrong. And while I didn't actually believe in that, I can understand why it would have. I know. Again, we're not getting into that, Chess. Now, I'm not baiting you into that. We're not doing that. I'm just trying to explain how, we tend to rationalize things a certain way, and so I can see that too. But look, despite that crash, his ability to compete didn't actually change one bit. So whatever he was dealing with internally, I'm sure was grueling, was massive in its own way,
Mm.
but we couldn't really feel the impact. At least nothing that I'm sure we could microanalyze things and maybe try to pinpoint to what certain things kind of led to or came out of, but yeah, I'll go back to your earlier point, Jess, which is it just raises the level of respect that we have and others should have, no matter which camp you're in. I think we talked about this in the last pod too, right? You don't praising one driver doesn't take anything away from the other one, right? Praising Lewis
Yeah,
Hamilton for,
correct.
for his accomplishments doesn't take anything from Max and vice versa. So I think it can be both. You can appreciate competition even if you don't necessarily like it. And for me,
Yeah,
it's another level.
yeah. I think this is more a commentary, a general commentary on the resilience of Formula One drivers, right? Like Max pulled out incredible performances with that disadvantage, with that. I mean, you could even call it a disability during the latter part of the 2021 season. But you look back the season before, like Lewis had to um, essentially come through the end of 2020 with COVID. You could argue that he reported that he was suffering from long COVID throughout the 2021 season as well. So, again, to come through that and pull out the performances that he did with that disadvantage, you think back even further to the way that Michael Schumacher won the Spanish Grand Prix in 1994, or came second in the Spanish Grand Prix in 1994 with only second gear.
Yeah, no, I
To be
mean,
able to be able to correct for those things and still maintain performance is awe-inspiring, and it should, as a general thing, make us all respect these guys much more than we do. And just to be really really clear, that when we criticize them, we are criticizing infinitesimally small issues, right, in the grand scheme of things, but that separate driver from driver, because yes, as you say, they are superhuman.
they are superhuman, and again, the consequences of a small misstep is absolutely massive. Where most of us in our lives don't have to deal with that. Maybe you do in your line of work, where every little thing matters so much that it can be life and death. And so this is no different.
Absolutely.
Our
Absolutely. Details are where it's at.
details are where it's at. Yep.
Okay, so we're going to go from the sublime to the slightly ridiculous
Great.
Sergio Perez.
Oh,
Sergio Perez. So let's just scene set this a little bit, right? So Checo, after a run of 4 races where he scored like 2 points, was given a 2-year contract extension. Right? We know that there were probably performance clauses, and we've talked about what we thought about that. That we thought that, I mean, personally, I thought that was nuts. That you would give a driver who has that who has shown that badly against his teammate at that point in the season, to give him a a contract extension right then, I think that the timing and the pragmatism of it was questionable. I didn't understand that. But perhaps just looking back on it a little bit, Red Bull thought, well, who the heck do we actually put in that seat instead of Checo? So I have got three options. I want you to tell me what you think of these ones, right? So first of all, I think Nico Hulkenberg would have been a good choice. He's now locked out of it with the Audi Sauber thing. But I think while he was still questioning his stay at Haas, that was a potential one. And just looking at how he's performed up until now against K-Magen in that car, he is carrying Haas right now. Absolutely. We talked about Haas being the stragglers and not really taking it seriously. Well,
Been proven wrong.
Hulkenberg is the reason they're not hanging off the back of the grid right now and sitting in front of RBs and Astons on straightforward weekends. Second one is Liam Lawson, who, well, we'll have a little talk about his test in a second. And the third one is Carlos, who still hasn't made up his mind about where he's going to go. So, what do you reckon?
Well, we can talk about through these individually, but I wasn't expecting you to say Hulkenberg. I do think that I can see why you said that, but to me, that's a little bit of a prisoner of the moment type of thing, where because yes, he has been doing great, and look, all kudos to him. Again, we just got done saying we should not be criticizing drivers, right? So that's fair. I'm not suggesting that, but I think in this table, I mean, again, Red Bull has prided itself on having a junior. They have a junior team for a reason too, right? So it kind of makes sense to see if they can promote from within. I found, and we can get into the other drivers too, but the timing of the Checo decision was really, really interesting, because if they do drop him now, I think that adds another level of intrigue.
Oh, it looks so silly, doesn't it? It just looks
so silly,
dumb.
Right. But they've never been afraid of sacking drivers. But then why did you give him a contract?
Give it an extension. Oh,
Waited until now.
I agree.
So yeah. But I mean, let's get into the Liam Lawson thing.
Okay, before you do that, I do want to make my case a bit harder for Nico. Okay, because look, think about what Red Bull need. Red Bull need a driver who is not going to topple Max. They just need him to be close. They need him to be within 2 or 3 tenths of him in qualifying and in races, so that they're not fighting with Max and then Nicholas Latifi. It's not two drivers of that kind of caliber going up against each other. They need some kind of balance.
An argument for Alex Albon or Gasly too. Like they could have brought back for, because those
sure, but they haven't, and those guys are properly locked into long-term deals, right? Whereas Nico, I think, only recently has been. And look, if you look at the other top teams across the grid right now, you look at McLaren, they've got a nice balanced driver lineup. Look at Ferrari, they've got a very balanced lineup, which we'll get into in a second. And you look at Mercedes, again, a balanced lineup. It's only Red Bull that are outliers that have this massive disparity between their two drivers. So you need somebody that is going to get closer. And if you're going to talk about Carlos Sainz being a contender for that Red Bull seat, you have to talk about Nico Hulkenberg. He's the only GP2 rookie winner on the grid that hasn't won a race, right? But he's always been in machinery that hasn't really allowed him to do it. He has beaten Carlos Sainz across a season. So you look back at 2018, and in that season, Carlos was fresh in Renault. Nico Hulkenberg beat him across that season, right? And now you look at the form drivers at the moment. He's absolutely walloping his teammate. Actually, I even forgot when they were at Force India together. It wasn't particularly one-sided between Checo and Nico Hulkenberg either. So it's not like Hulkenberg doesn't have pedigree. So it's not just me being a prisoner of the moment. This is pedigree, I think.
I take your point, but again, I would in terms of what they're looking for moving forward, right? Like if that's what the case, then. Look, I genuinely don't think they expected Sergio to be as bad on form as he has been. Like he has been massively bad. Like I don't think they thought about that too, which is where they probably did the same maths that you're doing with Checo versus with Hulkenberg, and saying, well, Do we really need a new driver coming in versus I think they banked on the fact that having that same
That's
level
fair.
of continuity, there's not that much there. I don't think they expected Sergio to be as far behind as many times as he has, right? There's that, right? And the second thing I would say is to some extent they underestimated their competition. I don't think that, even after saying the right things, I don't think they expected certainly a Mercedes to be there. I mean, Mercedes genuinely won the last Grand Prix on pure pace, right? McLaren, yes, maybe. Ferrari, they've got a bit of a break, but 3 races ago, they look like they might be the ones, right? So I think there's a little bit of that too, where they felt like they could ride out this wave with Sergio this year and then bank onto whatever they can for next year.
Yeah, I mean,
Gaps
yeah,
close.
but they need someone now, man,
Now
because
they do.
because they're gonna run into trouble in the
But the
constructors
complexion of
if
the season
Checo's
has
their
changed,
rear
right?
gunner.
Yeah, but the complexion of the season
Yeah.
has changed since they announced that
But
contract.
it had already changed by the time
Yes,
they
I
announced that
agree.
contract. That's the problem, right?
You're not talking about
And
the
I don't
finance,
think you can
right?
use that as a. I don't think you can use that as an
Yeah,
excuse.
but
So
whoever they replace right now is not going to sell Red Bulls the same way that Checo sells it in America. Like,
yeah,
and
but
that's no joke.
yeah. So we've talked about the non-performance reasons why Checo might still be in that seat, but now we're talking about, is that enough? And I don't think it is. The fact that they're already talking about performance clauses in his contract suggests to me that he is not going to see out this year. I don't think he will, unless something massive changes. And he's talked about the fact that, he's going to get the new floor that Max had in Silverstone for the next couple of races. He reckons that's worth a couple of tenths. If that also still falls flat on its face, I'm sorry, man, but that's,
I mean, a couple of
like
tenths
the
doesn't.
number of Q1 exits. Let's move on quickly to Liam Lawson, and by extension, I think Yuki's Tsunoda. So Liam Lawson had a test um, this week, in the same way that Daniel Ricciardo did last season, that got him into the RB. Um, this is what was reported. This is via Planet F1, so just take it with a pinch of salt. Um, so Lawson's filming day time slightly underwhelmed Red Bull, his quickest benchmark time being 2/10 off the time earmarked as Verstappen's benchmark from the weekend. I'm giving you that quote verbatim because I don't want you to think that I'm interpreting it, but to me that sounds like he didn't cut the mustard. And that also, I think, goes in line with the fact that, they, when they had the chance to bring Liam Lawson in this season off the back of Ricciardo not performing brilliantly at the end of 2023, they didn't do it. They kept him on the sidelines. So there's something about Liam that makes me think that they don't think he's the future. Um, and yet they think the same thing about Yuki Tsunoda. It doesn't matter what he seems to be able to do in that car. Silverstone, again, he outperformed Ricciardo. They still won't consider him for that Red Bull seat. What's going on?
Yeah, I really feel bad for Yuki. I mean, he has done nothing to not deserve a chance. At least get a chance, like at least get half a season, and let's see what it's like. And I mean, even now they can do that, right? I mean, he's still locked into one more year at RB. So worst case, you just put him back at the end at next year if you find someone else to replace him. But I think that disrespect is just amazing. I agree with you. I think that I don't know what it is because in the chances that Liam Lawson was given, he did a fantastic job. Like to me, again, yeah, he does warrant a chance, at least a shot at an RB. We're talking about Checo seat, but
Absolutely, absolutely,
sounds like that's what they
absolutely.
want to do. To me, this is more of a setup to get Daniel Ricciardo back in at Checo's seat, which is what they're
Oh,
trying to say
yeah,
this through this Planet F1. I'm not going to call it a report. I think there's a leak there. Right? To me, that
yeah,
those
yeah.
things are
It's a
deliberate,
leak.
right?
Yeah, it's a
So they're
leak.
trying to set it up as like, oh, okay, well, maybe not Red Bull, but maybe he can get the RB seat. And oh, by the way, let's promote Daniel. And I mean, there's something there, man. There's
Yeah,
something there that we don't know that ties into
yeah.
some of the other off the track stuff there. But
But the more I see about Daniel Ricciardo, the more it feels to me like it's a square peg for a round hole, right? They're trying to shoehorn him into that seat no matter what, and it doesn't make any sense to me because he is not performing the way that he should be
yeah, at
performing
this point, they look like
for
they can.
that seat.
Yeah, they look like they cannot develop new drivers, right? Like because you're not going to give Yuki a chance. You're not going to give Liam a chance. Like, and so you're going back to the old guy that left you, and that's like now 2 teams ago. Like, come on,
Who
like,
who is not performing in the way that you would need him to perform. Okay, So those are those two. Let's talk about Carlos. So Carlos is, you know, we started off thinking that he might go to Red Bull. We talked about how good that would be. He's now still, I think, in the frame potentially for a Mercedes seat as a replacement for Lewis Hamilton, because the reports from Toto are that Kimi Antonelli probably still needs a bit more time, despite his excellent performance over the Silverstone weekend and his sprint race win. There's still some questions about the Prima team that he's driving for, some of his wheel-to-wheel combat. I saw him actually when I was at the Australian Grand Prix this year, and from a position where he was fighting at the front, he still managed to have an accident and put it in the wall. So there's a little bit of F2 race nous that needs to come, and completely fair. It's not unreasonable to expect that a driver that's come from F4 straight into F2 might need a bit more time. So that puts Carlos back into the frame for that seat, but he's still available. Checo potentially might be kicked out. I want to give you some numbers, because I think with Carlos, there's two sides. There's the performance side, and then there's the teammate harmony side. But I want to just give you the performance side first. So Carlos has been up against Max before 2015. I've run the numbers on this, and we're looking at super times again. So just in case you don't know what super time is taking the fastest time between two drivers or a team over a race weekend, and then expressing the slower driver as a percentage of that time, right? The reason I use that is because it corrects for circuit length. So it doesn't matter whether you're racing at Austria or Spa, the percentage difference would be the same. That makes sense? So in 2015, Max's mean super time was 100.11 and Carlos was 100.33. So that put Carlos at 2%, 0.2%, 0.2% slower than Max, right? And if you look at what Checo's doing right now, he's nowhere near that benchmark, right? And that is Carlos as a rookie against Max as a rookie. Then have a look at Carlos versus his teammate right now, widely regarded as the fastest driver in Formula One over one lap. This is his qualifying. To 3 decimal places, they are the same percentage difference in qualifying. Yeah. Just take a second to think about that, yeah?
Look,
that's incredible. That is incredible. So from a performance point of view, if you're looking for a driver that is going to be able to take a car, and just specifically talking about that Ferrari thing, right? Because we're going to talk about Charles in a minute, but there's a clear pattern that when the car starts to perform not as well, Charles starts to drop off, whereas Carlos starts to really, really come on song. And what do Red Bull have a problem with right now? They have a car that is not performing as they would expect. The upgrades haven't done what they expected them to do, and other teams are catching them up. So they need a driver like Carlos that can bring the best out of a car that isn't performing as well as it could. And he has shown in numbers how close he is to the fastest on the grid. So that's the performance side. The team harmony side is the whole, well, there's been angst between the Max and the Carlos camp before. They don't get on well. And I guess that's something we can have a chat about, because I think times have changed since that was an issue back in 2015. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, one of the reasons I have fallen into the category of Minister of Defense for Carlos Sainz this year is I have intuitively felt what you just described with statistics, right? Which is he does seem to get it right more often than not, right? And if you're looking for a guy who's going to go out and out and beat or win on a race weekend, he's probably not that guy on pure pace, but you've seen him drive intelligent races, Singapore, Melbourne. I mean, even the British Grand Prix, even Austria. I mean, he was right there for whatever he could do. He maximizes everything on bad weekends. I think you're absolutely right. What do Red Bull have to lose with any of this, right? They clearly don't believe in any of their junior drivers, as we just got done talking about Yuki and Liam, right? Why not? Why not? What is the harm in doing that? I just don't see why they wouldn't even give it a shot, right? And then Carlos has, history with them. Yes, there was angst. Okay, cool. But I mean, there's been so much happening at Red Bull. Just take this year as an
Ah,
example, right?
exactly, exactly.
So if I mean to me, it's not even something to think about if I'm thinking about Daniel Ricciardo or Carlos Sainz. Like that doesn't it's not even a choice there. Like it's easy. I think the bigger question is, does Carlos want to do it or not? Because it seems like these are all 1 year deals out there, and that's not something that he wants, which I can't really blame him for either.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the angle that we're not taking with this conversation, right? But yes, I agree that what Carlos wants has to come into it. But what you're talking about is a driver that is currently in a car that can potentially compete for wins. Not right now, but it has been able to this season, and it is one of the top 3 or 4 teams on the grid. To then cash that in and go to a Williams team or a Sauber team that, or even Alpine, where they're not competing for wins and don't look like they're anywhere near doing that because there's a longer term prospect there. I can understand why he might say, well, if there's a Red Bull seat, I'll hold out for that, thanks, even if it's for a season or two, because you don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of seasons across the other top teams on the grid, right? You don't know what Lewis is going to do in a couple of seasons time. You don't know what Max is going to do in a couple of seasons time either. So, and I've been reminded this weekend that he's only 29. That's my main reason for looking at him versus Nico Hulkenberg, who again is unfortunately at the latter end of his career. 36, I think he is. So it's two different things that you're looking at. Um,
Uh,
but the go on.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
But I was just going to say the team harmony thing. I think is a non. It's a non-starter. It's not something that I would worry about. They've already had issues with Checo this season. I can't imagine that a team as operationally sound as they are couldn't handle 2 drivers going up against each other, and you'd still have to put your money on the fact that Max would outperform Carlos, so there would still be a clear performance gap between the two of them, probably.
Well, but and also you would take drama between the two drivers on the track any weekend over losing a constructors championship, which they are very much capable of losing the way things are going on right now. Like that and maybe the drivers championship is out of reach for anyone else, but this certainly is the constructors championship
Absolutely.
very much
As
up. So
Yeah, as Ron Dennis would say, it would be a good problem to have. Okay, so I'm going to leave that one there for you and me. But please, in the comments, just let us know what you guys think. Like, who should be replacing um, Checo Perez? Do you think that Checo should just stay in his seat till the end of the season? Let us know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys think. We're going to move on to, for the last 10 minutes, Charles Leclerc. Ammar, what the heck is going on? Charles was, I thought, after a slightly, couple of races at the beginning of the season where he was overshadowed by Carlos, and Carlos had his big win after coming back from appendicitis. I thought he was back. He was back. He was on it. He was from a pace point of view, from a strategy point of view, from an assertiveness point of view. All of those things were there, and yet here we are after another race where he's finished outside the points. What the heck is going on?
and this time around, he has himself to blame as much as we can blame the Ferrari pit wall. I think
Agreed.
I think you've diagnosed the issue correctly, right? In our discussion about raising the floor versus the ceiling, and we just got done talking about how Charles is able to really get the most out of a car and really raise that ceiling, right? But he's not a raise the floor kind of guy, and I think that is his greatest weakness, right? Earlier this week, we had quotes from Fred Vasseur talking about, we just if we're not going to have a car that's good enough, we just need to go through the process with it versus trying to get too much, which is sort of in a roundabout way telling Charles like, hey, don't do that. I mean, he did that in qualifying. Charles did in Austria too, and put himself out of the top 10, right? And then yeah, he wasn't able to kind of go through it with it then. this weekend, kind of the same thing again, right? I mean, he is just trying to do too much with the car.
Yeah,
You
this
can
is it.
see what's happening. It's trying to do too much in terms of qualifying. To me, I mean, I think he's trying to tell Charles, like, look, we're not going to get pole on certain weekends. We're not even going to be in the top three. That's okay. Let's just be fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever it is, because I think that's what's hurting most, right? Not being able to gather points on weekends when you're not expected to win is kind of the key right now. And I think Charles is just in the mindset of he wants to be in the title fight, right? And we know why. He had been in the title fight for a little bit in 2022 before, they were kind of out of it. 2022, right? Yeah. And then, the last couple of years, they've been kind of trying to play catch up. And this season, it's finally felt like it. And look, this is happening right after the Monaco high, right? Where he won. He even had those cheeky sort of radio messages about, well, can I extend my lead by a certain amount? Can I tell you how much I can extend the lead by, right? And all those things. And then I think they just had a little bit of Ferrari type complacency combined with not being able to nail the upgrades, and not just nail it, it's actually gone kind of backwards, right? And then him trying to do more. And I think when he tries to do more, it's just a disaster. It really just is. You can see that
Yeah,
how Carlos is maximizing everything. He's there, right? He got a podium. Of course, he inherited that, right, in Austria, but and even at Silverstone, maximized. He almost overtook Max in rainy conditions. There's actually a good shot at a
yeah,
front
he's brilliant.
ahead of a
Yeah,
Red
yeah.
Bull.
I mean, you heard Max sort of, what? How the heck did he end up there?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, so yeah, so Charles is offering me a massive conundrum at the moment, but because honestly, like I have some bias here. I absolutely love Charles Leclerc. I think he is the second coming of Gilles Villeneuve. But with that comes the Gilles Villeneuve mentality as well, and that I think is what needs to be reset. And Silverstone was a really important example of what that how that manifests itself, right? That that what Carlos can do is accept that this is the level of the car and then get the most out of that level. Whereas Charles, for some reason, thinks it's his responsibility that even when the car isn't performing, he has to get more out of it because he is a raise the ceiling kind of guy. Well, when the floor is lower than the track itself, you know, you can't raise that ceiling. You just need to get the most out of the car. Those are races you survive and get the best out of the package that you have, which is what Carlos is doing. But that thought about, when he's sixth or seventh after an appalling qualifying, he's sixth or seventh. He's made massively good ground in the first stint. To then go, right, I'm going to go into Inters when the track is still dry in a lot of places, and you could hear it on the radio as he went round that it was, it's dry here, it's wet here, well, I don't know, indecision, let's go for the Inters. The reason he did that was because he thought that if he goes on to Inters now, he could outperform his car. Why do that? Why go against the golden rule of wet weather driving, which is be on the right tire at the right time? It's overreaching, which Carlos doesn't do. It's what puts Charles, I think, in the wall when when the car isn't quite there, overreaching in qualifying, overreaching sometimes in the races. You think back to Australia 2023, where he qualified badly and put himself out in the first corner because he wanted to do too much coming out of the first corner. All of those things it's not something new. It's something that happens all the time. And I guess you could argue that you're going to win championships because your car is good and you're raising the ceiling. But championships are also won on the days when you don't have the best car and you just survive and you get yourself back and get the best result that you possibly can. I don't think Carlos is necessarily able to hit the absolute highs that Charles can hit, and that will cost him in a championship battle. But by the same token, Charles is not doing himself any favors, I think, by overreaching, as you say.
Yeah, I think we've seen a couple seasons now, 2, 3 seasons in a row, where when Charles tries to do too much, right, that it inevitably ends up in a bad place. And unfortunately, this is also symptomatic of the greater Ferrari problem, which is they seem to have put upgrades that are anything but upgrades. They've kind of have put themselves in the Aston Martin kind of upgrade fiasco, right? And they seem like, at least by the reports, they're at least a couple months behind everyone else, which is,
Well, they've got
and maybe
greedy,
they can still
Ammar.
figure it out. They
They,
can still figure it
I mean,
out. They can.
they've got greedy, haven't they? They saw
Oh,
downforce on the sim, whacked it on the car, and then got bouncing. And I think that the the key that all the other teams are starting to figure out is that they've worked out how to get the car low, but still maintain enough compliance in the suspension that they don't keep bouncing. And
and I think
Ferrari clearly haven't done that yet.
they can figure it out. They still can figure it. If Mercedes can make that big leap, I have full faith that Ferrari can make it out. For all the suffering that I have to deal with and joke about, their erratic sort of approach to certain things, they can figure it out. So it can be fair. And then more to the point, right? Charles has got to realize, hey, look, yes, we're going through a bad phase right now. I mean, look, they came off a Monaco win, so it would have been okay to not be on the podium these last three races, and but still have scored valuable points. I think what hurts is not being able to score anything. So the DNFs in Canada, I think that's probably
Yeah.
egregious one, but as egregious is the Silverstone one because he could have finished sixth easily, maybe
Yeah.
even a little bit higher.
Yeah. And that was, I agree, that was on him. And I think, look, what you talk about in terms of Ferrari coming back and having a car that can win races again. I think in that situation, Charles will be right back up there again. But you will always have the specter of doubt that if the car then has another dip, he will be nowhere.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
That for me is a problem that needs to be ironed out. And now I think it's the time to do it. This may be a blessing in disguise for Charles Leclerc, right? Having a car that isn't performing as well as it could be a blessing for him to learn how to forget about overreaching and just maximizing the package that you have. That I think is what he needs to learn from Carlos Sainz. Not all of the strategy stuff and dictating what the pit will do from the cockpit. It's just understanding that this is the package that I have right now and doing the best that I can with that package.
yeah,
There you go. Rant over.
I think you're right. I think that's 100% what they need to do. I think you're right. They got greedy. And oh, by the way, since we are talking about Charles, but I've heard a lot of reports about Fred possibly being sacked, and that to me just sounds ridiculous. I know, like you can't do that. You can't do that, guys. Like stop it with all of that. But it's going to be interesting next year, Shez. This is going to be really interesting because you have Lewis Hamilton in. Charles is going to probably want to assert himself as the number one guy. For all the things that they say out in public, like no Formula One driver wants to get beat by his own teammate. Like that's rung true for centuries.
Ammar, right now, if the Ferrari fluctuates in performance the way it has this season, I cannot see a scenario where Charles Leclerc beats Lewis Hamilton. I just can't.
I cannot see a scenario in which Lewis Hamilton saves us either. So there's that. Like, what are you
Sure.
gonna do? Like,
Sure, that's a different question. But sacking Fred Vasseur on the eve of anyway, I can't even finish that sentence. It's just silly, right? Ammar, I think that brings me to the end of my three drivers of the moment. Anything you want to add?
No, I think that I can't wait to see what Carlos does, right? This is going to be interesting because it looks like all the options are potentially on the table now, which it didn't look like that was the
100%.
case, right? So
100%.
we'll see.
Indeed. As usual, if you guys like what we're doing here, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We'll read them all. We respond to as many as we possibly can. We will see you guys in the next one.
Fix it, Fred.